All right, so chapter 23, we're going to be focused on the circulatory system. We're going to go through it through animals and the human circulatory system. We'll talk about what happens with different kinds of diet and how your circulatory system can get messed up. But first thing we're going to look at are some giraffes. Now, giraffes are pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. One, they look really cool, right? They have really long necks, which is kind of like the one thing that we think about it. I'm terrible at drawing giraffes. So if you were to kind of like look at, if you told me to draw a giraffe, and I'm looking at a giraffe, right? Here's my giraffe. We got its legs, right? And then I would give it kind of like this boxy, even though I see that it doesn't really look like that. Got to give it a tail. And then its neck. And then it's almost like a brontosaurus. Oh, you got to give it its ears. Yeah, it's just terrible. So like every kind of animal that I draw is just terrible. But the reason that I wanted to draw it was so that you can identify where its heart is, all right? And it looks like a long-necked horse, right? So heart, you know, pretty much where you expect it in its chest. You're like, that's not what the heart looks like. Yeah, I know. It doesn't look exactly like that. But the interesting thing about giraffes is it needs to get blood from its heart all the way up its neck to its brain, which is up here. And the other crazy thing that it needs to do is when it needs to drink some water and its neck goes all the way down, it needs to not pass out from having that change in blood pressure of having its head go all the way down below its body. Now you guys know if you do handstands and stuff, that can make you kind of dizzy, right? Especially once you get older, then you know you'll get, hopefully you don't, but you might get vertigo, you can get real dizzy from doing stuff like that. But giraffes have to move, and we're talking a large distance. When we do it, we're only like 4, 5, 6 feet. Giraffes, how tall are giraffes? I don't even know. 20 feet? I can't remember the last time I went to the Cape May Zoo, but yeah, they're pretty tall. All right, so let's jump into this. Giraffes are mammals, just like us. We both have hair, mammary glands, lungs, and a 4-chambered heart. All right, so they have a similar heart to us. But here we go. Let's talk about gravity. In many animals, including humans, the pull of gravity influences the flow of blood through the body. And you might have kind of talked to, I remember growing up, my grandma would always be like, I need to keep my legs up. And I would always find that interesting. Like, at some point in your life, does your legs just, you run out of mileage? Like, you just have to have your legs up? I didn't understand what was going on in there, that it was gravity pulling the blood down. And constantly what happens in us young, healthy individuals, the blood gets pushed back up by all these different things happening, which we're going to go over in this chapter. So I was like, what? I don't understand. But gravity is a big effect on us. And that's why laying flat is actually more, it's very relaxing for our heart, because then it doesn't have to pump the blood, against gravity. So as expected, gravity is always pulling blood down towards the ground. Pumping blood from the heart to the head is a bigger issue for giraffes than it is for humans for obvious reasons, right? Their neck is super, super long, all right? How has their circulatory system adapted having a head so far above its body? And that's the question we're going to answer now. So to regulate the pressure of blood in the head, the circulatory system of a giraffe uses these special valves, and the valves don't let blood kind of flow back. So they only let it go in one direction, all right? So it's like a valve, it only lets blood go up a little bit and then it can't go backwards. So then it goes up a little bit more, it can't go backwards. It's kind of like one-way valve. There's also these sac-like sinuses which help, and then other mechanisms that kind of allow it so that it doesn't have too much pressure going in one direction or the other. I know, very vague. They also have blood pressure which is close to twice as high as human blood pressure. So their blood pressure can be somewhere around 280 over 180 millimeters of mercury, and ours is 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury. Now, that can vary. Like, you can have slightly lower, you can have slightly higher. If you've ever heard of some people saying they have high blood pressure, that's when the top number and the bottom number can be much higher than that. And so the question to you guys is, which I'll answer immediately, so don't panic that I'm going to ask you this question, is what do these numbers even mean, right? Like, what are the numbers? Does anybody know? Does anybody want to share? No pressure. but if you know. All right, no problem. That's what I'm here for, right? So, the high number, this is when your heart pumps. So this is the pressure inside of you when your heart pumps, meaning that there's a lot of pressure going through when the heart's pushing the blood through. And then this is when the heart relaxes. So this is in between pumps. So you want to have these numbers to be in this kind of range, this 120/80, so that you're not pushing too much pressure through your system. Because if your blood pressure is too high, that can cause some things to literally crack. And those little cracks can cause little things to get dislodged. And those little things that can get dislodged then can get stuck in your head or in your heart and cause heart attacks and stroke. So like it can be pretty serious if you have high blood pressure. And that's why doctors are always, checking your blood pressure. I'm ridiculous and I check my blood pressure every night at home because I'm just nuts. So I'm watching TV, I'm making sure my blood pressure is good, and it's usually pretty good, 115 over like 70 something, which was I think yesterday. I could pull out my iPhone, give you guys all the boring stats if you really want to know. But yeah, so you want to make sure your blood pressure is good. All right, anyway. Similarly, in humans, special one-way valves in the veins prevent blood from flowing back down into the legs. So they have these things in their neck to make sure that blood gets up to their head, and then getting back down from the head is really easy. Gravity just pulls it down. For us, it's the opposite. In our legs, we have these one-way valves to help the blood get back up to our heart. All right, and so what my grandma was probably having issues with were her one-way valves probably weren't working so well. And you need some muscle mass in there to help get those valves to work to get the blood back up. And she was older, so that was probably not working so great for her. All right, and that's why she had to have her legs up, because having your legs up helps it. There's less gravity pulling it down. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of this chapter. And again, like the last one, I find this stuff super fascinating, and I hope it's super helpful for you guys with anatomy. And just kind of like your own life and knowing what you should be doing to keep you guys healthy. All right, so first of all, circulatory system. What is it, right? That's kind of the first question. So a circulatory system brings nutrients from your digestive system to your body cells, which is kind of overlooked because we usually just say, oh, it's about blood. It's about moving blood through your body, right? What's blood have? It has oxygen. The real point of it is not just that, but it's also to move your nutrients. So what you're eating comes out of your digestive system, moves through your body via your blood, and that's why what you eat can really influence your blood pressure, because that stuff goes into your blood, moves through your body, and then maybe it gets back into your liver, goes through your kidney, like all that kind of stuff. So your diet can really affect your blood pressure, your circulatory health, and all of that. Okay, what else does it do? It removes waste from your body cells, which could be carbon dioxide. All right, carbon dioxide is a waste, so it could be taking carbon dioxide out. It could be taking out dead cells, parts of dead cells and all that kind of stuff. Whatever is left over, it'll get rid of. In most organisms, it carries oxygen to your body cells and removes CO2 from your body cells. All right, we talked about that last chapter with respiration. We're going to cover it a little bit in this chapter because it is super important and add to what we learned last chapter. And it's necessary when the organism is too large for diffusion alone. Anything larger than a few cells wide would be too large for diffusion to work on its own. So anything that's larger than a few cells will usually have some kind of circulatory system. All right. Okay. So now we're going to kind of go through the animal kingdom and just kind of go through some examples, because this is some interesting stuff, and we don't get to see too many different kinds of animals often, so I'm bringing it back to bio. All right, so cnidarians and flatworms, these organisms do not have what's called a true circulatory system. They have what's called a gastrovascular cavity, which promotes digestion and distributes substances. So they're very primitive. You think about a jellyfish, you can kind of see inside of it. There's not much going on there, but they'll bring nutrients into their body, and then it'll kind of like move through, the area, and then they'll be able to get nutrients in and out that way. So that's what's going on with these very primitive organisms. All right, they don't need a circulatory system. All cells are in contact with the water, which contains oxygen and nutrients. These cells take in the oxygen directly from the water that they're contacting with. The cells undertake a process of diffusion to transport the oxygen. Nutrients and waste are in and out of the organism, so it's really like the whole body is kind of absorbing the nutrients and then getting rid of the waste in there. Most animals, however, use what's called a true circulatory system that consists of circulatory fluid, so you have blood, a pump, some kind of muscular pump, which is the heart, and then a set of tubes that carry the fluid, and these would be our blood vessels. So overall, it's not that complicated. There's three main parts. You have blood, you have the heart, you have the vessels to move the blood. All right, so we got this. All right, so starting on the simpler side of things, we have an open circulatory system. And these are found in arthropods, insects, spiders, crustaceans, many mollusks, and they basically consist of a heart. They have vessels, but they're open-ended, which means it allows the fluids to kind of mix, and the blood directly bathes the cells and functions as the interstitial fluid. So what that means is that they don't have capillaries. Their blood is not always inside of tubes. Their blood can actually get out and kind of move through the body and then kind of go into, there are certain structures, like it does say, you know, it has a heart which pumps and mixes the blood. It has some vessels that allow the blood to move through certain areas, but overall it's kind of a real just sloshing around of blood inside of their bodies. Not very efficient. But again, these are kind of less evolved, so they're going to be simpler. All right? So that's what's going on in open circulatory systems. The movement of the animal helps circulate the fluid throughout the body, kind of like with sharks, right? Sharks have to keep moving to keep their gills getting fresh oxygen. These, they got to keep on jostling around when, you know, they're eating so that they can get their blood circulating through their system. When the heart relaxes, fluid enters the heart through several pores. Each pore has a valve that closes when the heart contracts. And the tracheal system moves the respiratory gases in insects. So we knew that about insects. But insects will have these kind of like open circulatory systems to get the sugars and, you know, the other things from digestion throughout their body. All right, now this picture I think helps understand what's going on in here. Both of these are very simple, all right? So we have an open circulatory system of like a grasshopper, and then we have the closed circulatory system of an earthworm. And if you take a look at the differences, actually, let's look at the similarities. We have a heart in both of them, right? So we have a heart in both of them, and then they have tubes kind of going through both of them, right? So in here. But the interesting thing is with the closed system, your heart pumps your blood directly to all the areas of the body, and then it goes back to the heart. So it's very controlled, all right? So this small branch in the vessels in each organism, this is all the stuff that's happening in here. So we have all of these things kind of branching out. They go all over the body. Then they come all back to the heart, and everything's good. In the insect, we have the heart pumping, and there actually are multiple hearts. They're kind of like, as it says here, a tubular heart. It's kind of like a smaller heart than we're kind of like used to seeing. But what it does is it helps mix these fluids. So you have this circulatory fluid coming in, the heart pumps it in one direction, and then it forces it to kind of move through here. And what that does is you can kind of see that there's this kind of pattern where the blood is kind of moving in this direction to kind of keep mixing, right? And that allows everything that it's digesting, because if this is its digestive system here, that means there's a lot of nutrients and stuff right in here, a lot of sugars. So to get those sugars throughout the body, it needs to have this flow of circulatory fluid moving throughout it. So that kind of like moves it across. Then once it gets to here, all that sugar has probably been absorbed by the body, and then it kind of restarts. And it starts over here and kind of keeps on going through there. So that's kind of the difference between an open circulatory system and a closed circulatory system. Now, we're going to focus mainly on this because, you know, we have a closed circulatory system, but an open system is just fascinating as well. So that's why I wanted to make sure that we saw, all right? And then here's a more close-up. You can really see in here you have these pores. The circulatory fluid goes in there, it pumps, and then it kind of pushes the fluid throughout. I always think of, you ever see the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure or something like that? He always says tubular, like, you know, tubular, like it's an 80s thing or whatever. So whenever I see the word tubular, I always think that. But all right, anyway. Closed circulatory systems are found in all vertebrates, earthworms, squid, octopi. They consist of a heart, vessels that confine blood. It keeps it distinct from interstitial fluid. And so let's talk about this, because it's been mentioned twice. And we didn't define it. In your body, your blood is in the circulatory system, all right? But there is fluid that moves throughout, that's kind of just hanging out, and it's bathing your cells. It's in between your organs. It's just there. It's kind of like a clearish kind of liquid. It's just there. And it's your interstitial fluid, and it basically just keeps everything moist, all right? Now, what could happen is, if your circulatory system had, I don't know, some kind of abrupt, let's say you got punched, all right? So you get punched, and then you get a black and blue, right? The black and blue is where the blood left your circulatory system and then was just hanging out where it shouldn't be, in this interstitial fluid. And that's why it kind of turns that dark color, because it's deoxygenated blood that's just kind of sitting around in there. And it takes time for your body to repair the damage of the circulatory system, but then also to get that blood that's now dead, just kind of like chilling in there, out of there. And throughout that process, it goes from that dark blue kind of look to kind of like a yellowish color. You remember ever seeing like a black and blue or a bruise that it turns yellow? That yellow is bilirubin. And that's the jaundice thing that we were talking about before. So in that small area of your body, you can almost be like, oh, I have some jaundice, right? Because there's a lot of bilirubin in there until your body gets rid of it. So it's interesting that this whole process goes through here with I mean, we just went through a little history of medicine with interstitial fluid. All right, anyway, so closed circulatory systems. The vertebrate circulatory system is often called a cardiovascular system, including 3 types of vessels. So let's get into some Latin. Cardia is Greek for heart. Vas is Latin for vessel. So we're talking cardiovascular. It's talking about heart and the vessels, all right? And you can see on this person over here, this drawing of a person, a lot of different examples of these vessels and kind of like the tubes of your cardiovascular system in your body. It couldn't show you all of your capillaries though, because the whole body would just be covered, like, because the capillaries go throughout your whole body. So these are just showing you, you know, veins, arteries, arterioles, those kind of things. And again, we'll get into the definitions and defining some of that stuff later on. You're not going to need to know all of those things that are over there, just the general kind of terms, which a lot of them are right here. So arteries are defined as something that carries blood away from the heart. Veins return blood to the heart. And capillaries convey blood between the arteries and the veins. Fun fact, if you were to line up all of your blood vessels, they would circle the Earth's equator twice. Isn't that crazy? That is a lot of these little veins and arteries and capillaries and all that kind of stuff in there. So it's just crazy. So there's a lot of stuff going on in your body. Okay, so cardiovascular system of fish. As we kind of like continue, we're getting a little bit more complicated each time. And this is the first time where we're going to focus on this diagram over here. And we'll focus on this as we kind of go from a 2-chamber heart to a 3-chamber to what we kind of have now, our 4-chamber heart. So the heart in a fish has 2 chambers. And the chambers are the atrium and the ventricle. And now those terms are similar throughout all the different kinds of hearts. When blood comes back into the heart from your body, it enters through the atrium, all right? If you've ever kind of like saw, I don't know, movies or whatever, like gone to a big building, when you walk into the first thing and open the doors of a big building, you walk into the first area, they usually call that an atrium, all right? So it's similar to what we're talking about in here. So atrium comes into the heart, the atrium. The atrium then pumps blood into the ventricles, and the ventricles, that's where the big muscles of your heart are. That's going to pump all the way to either your, in this case, it goes to the gills. For us, it could pump to, you know, our lungs, or it could pump to any parts of our body. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's just talk about fish. So the heart has two chambers, one atrium, one ventricle. The atrium receives blood from the veins, which is what I was talking about before. The ventricles pump blood to the gills via large arteries. Then the blood travels to the body cells. And this is called a single circulation, since the blood moves basically in a single circle. Single circle, yeah, it sounded weird. So it goes from the heart to the gills to get oxygen, right? Now it's oxygenated. Then it goes to the body, then it loses its oxygen. Then it goes back to the heart, and then that process just goes over and over and over again, just one circle. Ours does a double circle, all right? And that's why we have 4 chambers, all right? But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. Arteries branch into arterioles, which branch into capillaries. This should sound familiar because we talked about bronchioles and bronchi, right? Bronchi or bronchus breaking up into bronchioles and then into the alveoli. So we're having a similar thing with this. And just like the alveoli is where gas exchange takes place, the capillaries is also where gas exchange takes place. And if you had capillaries on this side and you were in the lungs, over here you'd have the alveoli. So this is where you're having the exchange of gases, but if it's in, you know, your body cells, you would also be losing, you know, sugar would be exchanged and waste products and all that kind of stuff. So very similar with the idea between the lungs and the circulatory system. Okay, so that was fish. You can see here's a drawing of a fish. We have a fish. And you can see here's the heart pumping its blood. It goes into the gills. All right, gills, picks up oxygen, goes to the body, comes back to the heart, just keeps on going through this cycle. All right, so networks of capillaries are called capillary beds. These infiltrate every organ and tissue in any animal that has a closed circulatory system. So the capillaries are where the gas and nutrient exchange takes place. The capillaries converge into venules, which then converge into veins and then travel back to the heart. So it's kind of the opposite of it. It starts out with the very tiny capillaries, then they go together to form these venules, which are slightly larger diameter, and then the veins, which have a larger diameter, and then it goes back to the heart. And you can kind of see it here. I mean, here's the capillaries. This would be kind of like the venules, and then you have the veins, and you go back to the heart. All right.